Okay, moving on now in Theology Proper Part 2, we're looking at the metaphysical language or the substance and person language to think about the Trinity, to think about God, to think about attributes. We move on now to the person language. And so now we've covered the oneness language of essence, substance, and nature. Now we move on to the concept of a person. And the person language is interesting because now, instead of sort of generally considering existing essences, now we really think about what is a person. Because, let's see, a person, well, guess what? That means God, because we have divine persons, we have human persons, we have angelic persons, and then the question is how much are certain animals persons? So, which, by the way, that wasn't as big an issue 200 years ago, but what we've seen for the last 20, 30 years in our courts worldwide is the push for certain types of animal rights to declare animals full legal persons. So really thinking about the concept of person is going to be significant now more than ever theologically, not only to understand classic Christian doctrine, but to be able to answer these ongoing questions that have to do with what it means to be a steward of creation, how to properly understand animals and to treat them fairly, and so on and so forth. So with that, let's start with some of these definitions of person, and then I'm going to move to conceptually how to use this to think about divine persons, human persons, angelic persons, and then animals, and we'll put all that together. So we think about this first. The word itself, person, actually gets transliterated from the Latin persona or the Greek prosopon, which was used classically in sort of Trinitarian language, where in this case, what we've got where the terms originally meant it was a dramatic role. So it's something like someone in a theatrical play. Essentially, there was a mask worn by the actor that indicated a particular role that they played, individual personal role. And then eventually the concept of a persona or a prosopon later indicated the individual existence of the person or the character. But what's interesting is that initially it was a mask worn by an actor that indicated the specific and unique role that that person played. And then later it was used for, a person. But, and by the way too, so early on in the Christian faith, you might have one of our, early church fathers say, okay, well, we don't want to logically contradict ourselves because we say, look, when we say that God is one and God is three, we need language that's adequate for that. So now we have to develop language as well that, okay, we have the Latin-speaking West, but we have the Greek-speaking East. So we need to keep our precise theological terms equivalent. So, for example, we had persona and then prosopon in Latin and Greek respectively. But here's the problem. So now we can say, great, now we have one substance, right? That's God, and three persons. That's great because a substance, okay, one substance, three persons, not one substance and three substances, because that would be a logical contradiction. But that doesn't tell us how the persons are connected with the one substance. It just helps us avoid minimally some logical contradiction in the faith. So we move on and say, okay, let's get a more precise understanding of a person, okay? So the concept now of a subsistent, okay, from, again, the Latin subsistentia or hypostasis in Greek, and we're going to see these terms come up more and more in our technical studies in theology, where the idea of a subsistent or a hypostasis is going to be a particular being or existing thing, not existing stuff as a whole in a genus. For example, we could talk about human substance, okay, because technically all existing human essence is human substance, and it could be considered as a whole in the genus as all existing human essence, substance, or there's a philosophical concept called haexiety, which really means thisness, where we're considering now a particular instance of something, all right? So when we think about a particular or individual instance of something, That's when we really think about it as a subsistence or a hypostasis, a particular instance of something, a particular existing instance of something. Now, here's important. We think about genus as a whole. Here's all the stuff in the genus. Now we're considering one particular existing instance of that. So now we get into a very important distinction of what makes a person. So when we think about that, we'll go into a number of ways we're dividing up the universe or creation conceptually. One of the ways is to divide things into rational essences versus non-rational essences. Now, the difference being this: a non-rational essence will not, in whatever it is, whether it's jello or granite or whatever, that won't have psychological faculties like intellect, will, and emotions as part of that particular genus or essence of, for that thing. So you're not going to have powers or capacities to think, choose, and feel in a non-rational essence. Okay? So that's entirely one part of creation, are those things that have a non-rational essence. So when you get a particular instance of a granite, right? You have a rock. You don't have a person. You don't have a self-aware being because there's no properties or powers in granite to be able to think or choose. So now, unless you're in, again, in Disney World or animism, right, where you might posit that, yeah, well, maybe the rock does think and have feelings, okay? Well, we got into non-Christian worldviews earlier than that, so no, that's false. But now we have the concept of what is a rational essence. Well, a rational essence by genus now will be, well, now anything that would have as part of its essence intellect, will, and emotions. And again, that's what we call substantive theological faculties or a substantive theological psychology. A number of ways we could talk about this, but the concept is that now this thing or being has the power or capacity to think and deliberate, the power and capacity to choose, okay? And then the power and the capacity to have affections or to feel about things, right? Those are the powers of a rational being, which now we think about the concept of a person is going to be this, and we get into certain medieval and modern definitions of this, and it is what? A person is an individual instance of a rational essence, okay? So when you really think about this, what is a human being? An individual human person is as well, it's an individual instance or a specific instance of the rational essence in the genus of Homo sapiens, okay? That's a human person. What's an angelic person? It is an individual or specific instance of the angelic essence, okay? When we get into, now this is important, when we get to God, who is the Logos? Well, considered, that's a specific instance of the divine essence, okay? We look at the person of Christ, well, the person of the Son is not the person of the Father. So the person of the Son is a specific, distinct instance of the essence, okay, of the divine essence. And the Father is a distinct instance of the divine essence, and the Holy Spirit is a distinct instance of the divine essence. So in that sense, they are divine persons. We are human persons, and angels are angelic persons because we're specific instances of a rational essence. Now, quickly, and I'll bring this up later too, when we start thinking about the concept of personhood, okay? Couple of things. With this power or capacity for deliberation and thought, and again, we could take a whole semester to think about the metaphysics of personhood, but minimally you want to know this. The idea of being an ego really is to really be a self-aware being. But why do you have first-person introspective awareness? And it's actually fairly simple to explain. If you have these powers or capacities for thought, virtually you always have two things going on. One is the intellect bends back on the subject in a reflexive way automatically, so you are self-aware. You are not the desk you're sitting at. You're not the person sitting next to you. Why? because as a thinking substance, you have an automatic action that takes place where, again, the intellect is thinking, but its first operation is to bend back on the subject as an object. And in that sense, you have self-awareness, okay, as an individual instance of a rational essence. But not only are you thinking and aware that you are you as an ego or an I, but you're thinking about the good, the true, the beautiful, where you're going to go for lunch next, when is this lecture going to end, right? You're going to think about all those sorts of things. So arguably, you minimally have two operations going on. You have reflexive operation of the intellect, and then you have an ongoing operation of the intellect where you're deliberating about, the good, the true, the beautiful, and trying to think about what your next step is for enjoyment in life. So that's really, we think about the concept of personhood, where I'll go into this a little bit more and apply this to the doctrine of God, but that brings us to what can be a touchy subject that we don't want to say too much or too little on, but where are animals on this? And I always want to say this, that, well, are animals persons? And you're going to get a lot of debate and argument going on in the believing church on this. And I would say this, that, well, let's just take a dog, okay? Does a dog think? Does a dog choose? Does the dog know he's not the dog food bowl that he's eating from, okay? The answer would be yes to all these questions. Okay, so could you say that the dog in that sense is a self-aware being? Yeah, probably. Okay, well, the dog is a person, but what's significant here is what kind of persons that we have. Well, guess what? Divine persons are different from human persons, okay? God knows and has far more abilities than a human person. Well, if you could say there's something like a canine person, then you can say, well, what we have is really a self-aware being that really it's not a morally responsible being. So in that sense, we don't see dogs or cats or roaches or whatever judged by God at the final judgment. Also, while you might make a case that animals have souls, there really isn't a good case, in my opinion, that they have immortal or eternal souls that don't go out of existence. So, but again, more on that later. So the key is that if you've got a person as a specific instance of a rational essence, does that really require moral accountability or capacities that humans have, such as ability to have second-order thought, to think about our thoughts? Like, okay, you want to go out and have a triple bacon cheeseburger after class, but should I have the triple bacon cheeseburger after class? So you can reflect on your first-order thoughts, or have abstractions, or have moral thoughts, or things like that arguably other lower kinds of persons don't have. So again, torment your friends who think that animals aren't persons, because if you make a proper distinction, you say, yes, okay, they're persons, but they're not morally responsible persons. And they can still be the property of human beings according to God, according to Scripture. But, if you don't want to say they're persons, come up with something else. But you want to make that distinction between morally responsible and accountable persons. And on the flip side of that, as living self-aware beings, and I made the case too that we can make a case for a hierarchy of value. The things that are most like God are more valuable, the things that are the least like God are less valuable. The fact is that a dog is more valuable than a dirt clod. Dogs can feel pain. They can respond to commands. And we won't get into cat and dog theology at this point. Remember, you're not going to train a cat, and so on and so forth. Yeah, remember the thing, dogs think you are God and cats think they are God, right? So never mind. We'll get into that debate in class and online. But in all this, to say the Bible gives us some instances where it says things like, don't muzzle the ox while he's threshing. These are God's creatures. They're self-aware. They can feel pain. So while they're not as valuable as human beings or morally responsible, you can make a case that they should be treated like a certain type of valuable being. And I'll end with this. Technical language and scholastic theology. A specific instance of a rational essence we call a being, okay? And often we use the term thing, okay, or race, to indicate a specific instance of a non-rational essence. So a rock is a thing, but a human person is a human being, not a human thing. Okay? So at least, again, not everybody uses the language precisely, but anyway, next time I'm going to pick up and we'll start to look at moving into the attributes of God and how we will use some of these things and really thinking about the oneness of God. And we'll get into what we, in an apologetic or Elenctic theology, what are proofs of deity? And how can we use as one of our proofs of deity the concepts of the attributes of God? Okay, thanks.